But yes, I'm trying to make sure that we can at least project or have a large enough television screen so we can see our Zoom participants who are have very much been a part of our studies over.
Where will you put that screen though, Rabbi?
Depends. It depends. So right now we're working on getting it all in the sanctuary building. So if we do, then we'll either have a very large television screen or we'll have a projector screen and then pop it on that. So we're figuring that out. That's the next step. But before we go into the room, that we have to have that. We can't just have a good signal.
So we'll have class now even on Tuesdays in the sanctuary then,
yeah,
correct?
I think so. That's the only way we can hardwire it to the internet, and there's no way we're going to do it. There's no way we're going to do it wireless. That's not going to happen.
No.
So that won't happen. We have a hard enough time on this line, which is a wired line. Actually, I'm joking because Mike knows we have no problem Tuesday mornings usually, but Wednesdays, not the case.
Well, in the last few Wednesdays, we've been good though.
I know, but we can't.
You can't go wireless.
We can't have that yet. I don't know. And you know what? I think it's the last few weeks have been better. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's been better because I think there's less traffic on Zoom. I think
exactly.
Zoom's got less stuff. I don't think it was necessarily even the cable modem that I have, which is high speed, and I don't think it's necessarily my computer. I think it's Zoom. But
and it also could be your neighborhood though too. It could be people, in the neighborhood.
Absolutely. Yeah, less people just on our hub that, not our hub, but our hub.
On your cable, if you have cable.
Our cable hub,
right.
Yeah. Spectrum. So yeah, these are all issues that we never thought about before, but I am committed to making sure that the people who are with us virtually are going to be able to be there. Because my guess is that Rosemary, who's very critical as our reader, who I'm going to turn things over to in a second. My guess is that some days she may not want to come in from Santa Paula to be there. She may decide that virtual is a really fun way to be a participant and be part of it. And look, I hope people, wherever they go or wherever, that they can be able to do it because,
I think it's great, because I do like seeing Jeff, every now and then, not every day, but
every now and then.
Once a week.
Yeah, there you go. I can deal with you once a week.
But I tell you, it's really been good for me because I've been able to very rarely, if I had to not have class, and it's usually a more of a issue of being out of town and not being local. So I like that. I don't like.
Oh, it's great because we plan on we're going to Sedona in a week and a half or so, and we can just sign right in.
Yep. So it's really cool. I'm waiting to do this on a different, completely different times. I've done it in different time zones before. I've been a few hours ahead. Well, I've never been like 10 hours ahead or 8 hours ahead. So when we do this class,
Israel or Europe or something.
Exactly, when I'm in England or in Israel or in China, that would be really fun to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it is.
Do it the next day tomorrow. The day before.
Do it from the future and when I'm in China. Oh, well, that'll be a whiles from now, probably. Actually, maybe over the summer. And I do know, by the way, people who are in Israel this week. So I'm hoping that, again, as I said before, hopefully things will return to at least peacefulness, if not long-term peace. That's also obviously the bigger hope. Look, last week we read a pretty powerful part of the Midrash, of Moses getting the 10 commandments. I think everybody was there, but it's one of my, as I said before last week, it's one of my most memorable, I guess really favorite Midrashim, which is the story of Moses seeing Rabbi Akiva studying and being blown away by Akiva's insights and ability to see things that Moses couldn't see himself in the Torah. And then he sees Akiva's reward for this, which is to have his skin torn off his body. And as the Midrash says, his skin being sold in the market, it's pretty powerful, because again, it gets to this question of, are there rewards for our goodness, for our studies, for our merit? Do we merit some special treatment? And the Midrash seems to say no. There definitely is a continuing theme here in what we're going to read today, which is, we're going to finish this section about Moses getting the Torah, and then we're going to go into the golden calf scene. Now, there are things in between that in the Torah. So the Torah at Mount Sinai is chapter 20. And then from 21 roughly until about 30, we have Parshat Mishpatim, and we have the portions that deal with the construction of the tabernacle, and the instructions there, Truma and Tetzaveh, which are essentially laws and descriptions and measurements. The next narrative is the golden calf, which is pretty much starts up again in about chapter 32, 33, 34. Those chapters are the golden calf incident while Moses is on Mount Sinai. So it's roughly, the narrative it's the same time, but it does skip over, the Midrash skips over that, mainly because there's not really any narrative there. Just like you're going to see, there's not really a lot of narrative in the whole book of Leviticus, because there's no narrative there. So the rabbis don't really have a launching point to go into Midrash. And there is Midrash texts on Leviticus and on these laws, but they're more explanations of the laws. They're not explanations of like, how did we get from point A to point B, or again, there is a Midrash on Leviticus, but it tends to be really other stories that they're illustrating the laws rather than, or stories that they're able to bring in quotes about the laws rather than narrative, because there really is no narrative. So it's not in Ginsburg's collection, what we're studying. So we're picking up right after Moses's view of the future, which is also one of the interesting things that God can do, is God can show us the future, which, by the way, means that it's already happened. It's a kind of a paradox as far as time goes, obviously, but the Midrash seems to assume that it can be done, it can be seen, and to some extent that it's already happened. I'm a little
Rabbi, maybe it's more like this could happen in the future, not really this will happen in the future.
Yeah, it is an interesting paradox. I'm only, again, kind of wrapped up in this right now because I just saw Tenet, Christopher Nolan's last movie about time travel, and Christopher Nolan always plays around with time, with even in movies that, Memento was one of his most famous movies that dealt with time and memory. But what's interesting about all of his movies, including even a movie like Dunkirk, is that he doesn't tell a story in a linear fashion. And that's really important for you to remember, that the rabbis didn't tell stories necessarily in linear fashions as well, in the sense that the past and the future to them kind of exist simultaneously with the present. And so there's movement between the past and the future that, the past isn't actually as important for them to see, because they don't even see the past as something that needs to be seen. It's almost as if time is existing simultaneously all the time. And so the fact that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are invoked and even visited, now they recognize that they're not alive anymore, but they're static in a sense. Their presence is assumed. And what I mean by that is that Akiva's presence is assumed in the story in a way that, you and I don't necessarily understand this because we don't see time the way that the rabbis did, which is that, again, they didn't see it as a line. They saw it more as a circle or as a prism of reality that exists simultaneously any time.
But Rabbi, the rabbis were looking in the in the past, 500, 600, 1,000 years in the past. So they knew what happened in the future.
Yeah, except they assume that God knows what's going to happen in the future, and you're going to see that in the Midrash today. Okay. We saw it with the Akiva story,
right?
But you're going to see it in this as well, and it's almost, again, it's real important to remember this because the rabbis are going to assume that God knew all along that we were going to go into the golden calf immediately after. I mean, you're going to see that, which again, so if everything is kind of preordained, then that's preordained. And the rabbis recognize that, which means that God knows that the people are going to immediately violate the Torah, the 10 Commandments, literally while they're getting them. Which they deal with that. I mean, they deal exactly with that issue, as we're going to see. So you'll see that, like, not this paragraph, but the next paragraph. So we're starting with this part here. Moses sees how God wrote the words long suffering. So again, the last thing we read is that God tells Moses to be quiet when he questions what happens with Akiva. And I will tell you, keep that in mind, because even though we finished with that last week, it is a theme that goes on today in today's reading, if you will. All right.
Moses then saw how God wrote the word long suffering in the Torah and asked, "Does this mean that you have patience with the pious?" But God answered, "No, with sinners also am I long suffering." "What?" exclaimed Moses. "Let the sinners perish." God said no more. But when Moses implored God's mercy, begging him to forgive the sin of the people of Israel, God answered him, "You did yourself advise me to have no patience with sinners and to destroy them." "Yea," said Moses, "but you did declare that you are long suffering with sinners also. Let now the patience of the Lord be great, according as you have spoken."
So Moses at first seems to think that sinners should get punished, and then when they immediately sin, Moses changes his tune. So again, this is Moses not recognizing, the future.
He doesn't think that people he likes are going to get punished as sinners.
Correct. And also maybe, like, he's thinking, no, these people are really, they must get it. They just heard the commandments. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take very long for them to break it. And that's the theme for today, is that it didn't take long for them to break it. And again, it gets back to human nature, if you will, which is, if you give us rules, we tend to break them. And again, it for us, some of them are serious. And the rabbis recognize that in their own day, and they recognize that Moses himself and the people who lived during Moses's time were just as fallible. And so you're going to see that theme in this as well, which is Moses is really great. We know Moses is really great, but he's also a human being. And so he gets things that no other human being gets, but he's still a human being. So he does some amazing things, though. There's no doubt he's going to do some amazing things. One of them is this.
The 40 days that Moses spent in heaven were entirely devoted to the study of the Torah. He learned the written as well as the oral teaching. Yea, even the doctrines that an able scholar would someday propound were revealed to him. He took an especial delight in hearing the teachings of the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, and received the joyful message that this great scholar would be one of his descendants.
Yeah. And so this is kind of like the Rabbi Akiva story, which again, Moses learning that there will be people seeing the future, that there'll be great rabbis. So the Tanaim are the rabbis that are quoted in the Mishnah, the first part of the oral law. The Tanaim lived from about 200 BCE to 200 CE. So over about that 400-year period, all their teachings and their laws are codified in the Mishnah, the first part of the Talmud. So this early section is written in Hebrew. It's written by rabbis who primarily live in the land of Israel, or at least study in the land of Israel. Later on, the rabbis in the Babylonian Gemara and the Jerusalem Gemara, they comment on these, but the Tanaim are revered as like the first great generations of rabbis. So the first generations, these are the ones who codified the laws in the Mishnah. They taught, they preserved Judaism during the Roman destruction. They lived over that Roman destruction. They probably wrote this stuff down because of the Roman destruction and because they wanted to preserve it in case they died. And many of them were martyred, like Rabbi Akiva is one of those Tanaim. He's one of the later Tanaim. But one of the other ones is Rabbi Eliezer, who's actually his teacher. Rabbi Eliezer Hyrcanus, who's one of the most quoted Tanaim in the Mishnah. Interestingly, he is excommunicated, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. He's excommunicated. Very interesting feelings about Eliezer, because he was considered a fairly conservative scholar, pretty stringent, but yet runs afoul of the community and essentially kind of has to stay away from everybody for a good chunk of his latter part of his life when he's excommunicated. Very interesting guy. And the rabbis here kind of, they tip their hat to him and kind of recognize his greatness. While again, they knew he was problematic. He's a problematic guy. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about Rabbi Eliezer, but Google him, Wikipedia him. He's an interesting guy and worthy of consideration and thought, because there's probably pieces to his life that the rabbis didn't want to talk about, yet must have been pretty interesting. So Moses is impressed by him, which means, of course, the rabbis were impressed by him. All right.
The study of Moses was so planned for the 40 days that by day God studied with him the written teachings, and by night the oral. In this way, he was enabled to distinguish between night and day. For in heaven, the night shineth as the day. There were other signs also by which he could distinguish night from day. For if he heard the angels praise God with holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, he knew that it was day. But if they praised him with blessed be the Lord to whom blessing is due, he knew it was night. Then too, if he saw the sun appear before God and cast himself down before him, he knew that it was night. If, however, the moon and the stars cast themselves at his feet, he knew that it was day. He could also tell time by the occupation of the angels, for by day they prepared manna for Israel, and by night they sent it down to earth. The prayers he heard in heaven served him as another token whereby he might know the time. For if he heard the recitation of the Shema precede prayer, he knew that it was day. But if the prayer preceded the recitation of the Shema, then it was night.
So what's so hard about being up in heaven? It's kind of like being up in Alaska during the summertime. It's always light out. And so you don't really know you can't keep track of time normally. Just can't use those normal cues from nature. So he knew what time it was by watching the angels, what the angels do or what they say. And again, the angels have things that they say for God. These statements are very similar to what we still do as part of our prayers, though human beings, especially Jews, as we see, we say the Shema. But the angels do their own prayers. And these prayers, interestingly, actually became more important, or just as important, you can argue, in Christianity as they were in Judaism, because these kinds of praise God words were definitely taken from synagogue or Jewish worship. The examples of these types of prayers that we have are like the one that we just read, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzvaot, which is part of the Kedusha prayer in the Amidah, or Baruch Shem Kavod Leolam Vayed, that God's holiness reigns forever and ever. The refrain that we say in the Shema, which according to traditions is what the angels say. These are sometimes the fancy word for them are doxologies. The Mourner's Kaddish is also one of those doxologies, which really are just, rather than asking God for things or just kind of brachot, thanking God for things, or acknowledging God's creation of things, like, thank you, God, for our bread. These are statements that are, kinds of statements of faith, but they're very common in church services. I don't know. Help me out, Reverend Lynn. These are,
Well,
Yes.
as it was in the beginning and always shall, those kind
as
of.
it was in the
World without
beginning, so
end,
it is
amen.
now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Yes.
And I think all
That's right.
creatures, great and small, is part of one too, isn't it? Reverend? No?
No, that's
Got that wrong.
extra canonical,
Oh.
but it's nice. But
So-
certainly the holy, I mean, that's just, those are repetitive prayers, as you've said, that we receive or took from temple worship. And as a matter of fact, the first time I went to a temple as a kid, I thought, whoa, wait a minute, it's morning prayer. So
yeah.
they're just very similar.
We tend to bury them a little bit in our stuff, so they're a little bit harder to they're a little bit harder to find, if you will, but they're there, and they probably used to be there more when we were copying what we did in the temple. So the Kohanim probably engaged in this early synagogue kind of mimicking the temple, probably did it. And as it kind of moved away from that, and there's accretions of other blessings, and the rabbis engaged in compositions, liturgical compositions, and probably, again, borrowing from other places. Definitely Psalms, were used, but they started getting buried, but they're there, and they're still, you can, like, interestingly, they're some of the more powerful prayers. And the Kaddish is one of them, because again, when you think about the Kaddish, it says God's name is great, God's name is God is beyond all praises, and it really is it's more of a statement. It's more of a statement of faith that than it is, asking for things or even praises of thanks. Because when we say we thank you, God, then we're kind of part of the prayer. We acknowledged, kind of our dependence on what, all of those ideas are kind of implied by the prayer. But these other kinds of prayers are literally almost like, again, what we imagine the angels do, which is that they don't ask God for anything. They don't need anything from God. They're not in a relationship with God of dependency or mutual dependency, or however you want to understand that. I mean, the rabbis definitely understood it in some different ways, but they did say things, and these things are the cues that tell us what time of day it is. And again, this is kind of
isn't that what worship is? I mean, they vary by time of day or need or season.
Yeah. There's an understanding that some part of this, interestingly, at least the way it came through Judaism, is that these are recitations that the angels do. And so when we do certain prayers, we literally are imitating the angels, which, it's a good thing. So the reason that we traditionally rise up on our toes when we do kadosh, kadosh, kadosh is that we're imitating the angels. We're actually literally trying to levitate and trying to, become like angelic as we say those words, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. So we're imitating angels in those, which is a little different than, again, kind of our more human-centered prayers. So Moses picked this up, in heaven, and kind of or at least the rabbis felt he picked it up in heaven. And again, it's kind of the way we know what time of day it is. But you can see that God, the angels are doing stuff for us, though. They got manna, they're making it, they're preparing it in the kitchen, and then at night they're bringing it out for us. So that's something that's going on.
Even though they don't like us.
I don't think they have a choice. Interestingly, though, we're going to see what one of those angels in particular does when he's upset with the human beings. It's a wonderful midrash. We're going back to the angels not being happy with us. But right now, again, parts of the midrash, Moses is doing the right thing. Moses is with the angels and having a great time. You're going to see Moses is also human, and again, that's part of the problem. Yeah.
During his stay with him, God showed Moses all the 7 heavens and the celestial temple and the 4 colors that he was to employ to fit up the tabernacle. Moses found it difficult to retain the color, whereupon God said to him, "Turn to the right." And as he turned, he saw a host of angels in garments that had the color of the sea. "This," said God, "is violet." Then he bade Moses turn to the left, and there he saw angels dressed in red, and God said, "This is royal purple." Moses hereupon turned around to the rear and saw angels robed in a color that was neither purple nor violet, and God said to him, "This color is crimson." Moses then turned about and saw angels robed in white, and God said to him, "This is the color of twisted linen."
So these are the colors that we read, or for those of us who were studying the Torah on Wednesday nights, a month or so ago, 2 months ago, we read about the creation in Truma and Tetzaveh. And this is, from the portions that we read before the golden calf about the descriptions. These are the colors that are there. In case you were wondering, the translation's probably not great for violet. It's probably should be blue. Techelet is a blue color, so it's probably not a great translation. But again, the colors are red, purple, blue, purple, red, and then white, which again isn't really color, but it is the absence of color. But it's one of the colors that's one of the fabric colors that's used. And obviously it was important because Moses needs to remember this. And so he's having a hard time figuring it out, which we of course have a hard time figuring out. And so the rabbis tell us that God actually shows Moses the colors in heaven so that he knows what they are. So you can take that back down.
Are there liturgical colors for liturgical seasons?
No, so we don't have that. We lost the colors. This is something that we've kind of talked about on the Wednesday night classes. Unfortunately, because we don't really have the colors, we don't have the dyes anymore. We don't try to make the dyes. That doesn't mean that we don't kind of know what they are, which is why I said, well, it's probably more like a blue. So and that's the color that we usually use for the talit. The issue is we don't know how blue purplish it is, which is why we don't make it anymore. And we know it came from the Murex shell. We know that. We know where they made it in Tyre. They in Lebanon, they imported it. It was a really important color. It's also, again, you see royal purple. Probably, again, another one of those colors that was purplish, a little darker. The crimson color, we probably, again, is pretty red, but we don't know the exact colors. And so rather than mess up, we don't make them anymore. So the talit says that there's going to be a fringe, a garment, the garment has a fringe of blue on it, techelet on it. But we don't know what that color looks like, so we don't use it anymore. But taluses are used to be oftentimes in blues to kind of remember that the shawl part would be in blue to kind of remember the color. But very rarely will you see people try to put it in the talit. Doesn't mean that they don't. It doesn't mean that there's people who don't try to put in a blue fringe to remember that. But generally speaking, the tendency is if you don't know what it is, don't try to do it, because then you may do it wrong, and that's worse. So it's better not to try it. That's the thought. Same thing goes with the incense. One of the reasons why Jews stopped using incense is because incense, while it was very important in the tabernacle and in the Beit HaMikdash, the temple later on, because we don't know the exact way it was made, and the Torah is actually very careful to say, don't make it wrong, else you're going to die. People didn't make it. And so they don't even try to make it. So again, Christianity took a little different turn on this, which was, let's try to do it. And so they did. They used incense. They still do in some forms of Christianity. Obviously, they still use, as Reverend Lynn is alluding to, there are liturgical colors, and there's colors that are used in vestments, and there are colors that are used in decor that are reminiscent of these colors. But and some other colors too that aren't mentioned in the Torah, but we didn't do it. And so we gave up colors, we gave up smells, we gave up a lot of the sensory things that in Jewish worship, because we just didn't want to do it wrong. And it's an interesting, not necessarily, I would say, great idea, but there are feelings that sometimes people say, if you're not going to make that recipe like grandma made, don't even make it, because you're not, you're going to do it injustice to it. And this is maybe a bad example, but there are people who say, I'd rather you not do that. And again, it's unfortunate, because then people don't wind up eating that food anymore. But there are people who have that, who have that feeling about it. If you can't paint like Picasso or whatever, then don't bother. But I mean, that's kind of weird. I mean, why not try to do something yourself and use the spirit of it? And Judaism in the last probably 50, 60 years, maybe going back a little bit earlier, there have been attempts in Judaism to try to recapture some of these things, because people have said, look, we can't deprive people of everything just because you're going to worry about doing it wrong. And so people have experimented with stuff, in Jewish worship, including incense occasionally, including more colorful taluses. I don't see still people putting the blue fringe in very much, but you see much more colorful taluses, and you start to see more decorations in synagogues that, people would say, hey, that I never saw a decoration like that in a synagogue. It used to be very little decoration in synagogues. And when Jews dabbled in decoration, it would be stained glass and kind of geometric patterns, nothing that could possibly be offensive to somebody from the standpoint of idolatry or pushing the boundaries or doing something not right. But it makes for, again, a very bland worship if you try not to offend somebody or try not to do something wrong. Anyways, you will see, as I said, more music, more, we had musical instruments in the temple, but people didn't want to do it because they weren't sure that we were supposed to do it once the temple was destroyed. So it is the strange trap of Judaism, which is, do you try to reclaim these things, or do you recognize that they were destroyed and therefore we have a hole in our lives because they're gone? But I mean, if you have so many holes, then you have nothing left, and there's nothing. So again, Judaism had stuff. We had beautiful poems, beautiful songs, beautiful liturgy, but there was not a lot of other sensory experience in a synagogue. I mean, it's why we still deal with, what kind of images, whether we can do certain things, because do they push the boundaries of what's acceptable or not? Anyways, I will get to part of the problem in a second, which is the golden calf. So Moses is engaged in study, but he's still a human being.
Although Moses now devoted both night and day to the study of the Torah, he still learned nothing, for hardly had he learned something from God when he forgot it again. Moses thereupon said to God, "O Lord of the world, 40 days have I devoted to studying the Torah without having profited anything by it." God therefore bestowed the Torah upon Moses, and now he could descend to Israel, for now he remembered all that he had learned.
Yeah, so Moses Moses is having a problem retaining the information. Well, he was over 80, by the way. He's in his 80s. But even Moses, for all his greatness, can't remember it. So there has to be a hard copy. And so it's even Moses couldn't remember it all. So remember, according to the rabbis, what we read, Moses didn't just get the Torah, he also got the oral Torah, which means that he's got a lot of information there. He's got all of the law that we have in the scrolls, but he also has all the oral Torah that was not written down. This was very important to the rabbis because they believed that the laws that they were teaching, the commentaries in the Mishnah and later on the Gemara, were literally there at Mount Sinai too, that God gave those to Moses as well, that Moses didn't just invent them, that they didn't invent them, that they were revealed at Mount Sinai, but they've been taught orally from one person to the other. So Moses did come down with a written Torah, but they also believed that he actually came down with oral teachings from God that he imparted to other people. Moses in turn imparted it to Joshua. And this is really important for the rabbis because they really believed that what they were teaching was from the beginning. It was very important to have that authority of the text. And they recognized, of course, that the text was never going to be as authoritative as the Torah itself. So they had to basically say that it mirrored what was in the Torah. So when there was a question from the Torah, the hyperlink to it would be what was in the oral Torah. But that hyperlink information was what they had orally, was not written down. And they taught was not supposed to be written down. It was only written down when they were being killed by the Romans. And to some extent, there's a nod to the fact that they couldn't remember it all anymore either. And this is a problem because obviously by the time that they wrote it down, the oral law was now a good 1,000 years after the Torah, the written Torah. And so they had to write it down because it was just too much information for people just to be able to teach back and forth to each other. There needed to be a writing down, and there had to be written down. But now there's a question again: is that really oral Torah? But we still call the Talmud the oral Torah. We call it Torah Shebaal Peh. That this is Torah that was written, not written. It was oral Torah. So even though the oral Torah later on does become written Torah, it's not recognized as such. It's recognized as oral Torah, which again isn't any less valuable, they believed, as the Torah itself. But it was a huge leap. So Moses forgot and needed to have it written down. Now we're going to get into the discussion of one of our favorite angels. Yeah, that guy, that angel.
Hardly had Moses descended from heaven with the Torah, but when Satan appeared before the Lord and said, "Where, forsooth, is the place where the Torah is kept?" For Satan knew nothing of the revelation of God on Sinai, as God had employed him elsewhere on purpose, that he might not appear before him as an accuser, saying, "Will you give the Torah to a people that 40 days later will worship the golden calf?"
Okay, so stop right there. So just explain what happens. So Satan's job is to accuse us of, to bring to God's attention all the things that we do. So originally, Satan is not a deceiver as much as simply, again, as we talked about, he's the advocate. He's the devil's advocate. He's the person who tells the angel, the entity that tells God, look at all the things that these people do that are not good. Now, that means the accusers, we call Satan. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth. Later on, we have versions of Satan that he lies, that he creates situations for us to screw up. He does all these things because that's what he does. He wants us to screw up. So once you have an angel who wants us to screw up, then anything is possible. Lying, forcing us into those situations, all those other kinds of things. But originally, it's not like that. Satan's job is really just to say, hey, but what about this? Did you forget about this? And so, of course, this presupposes that this is known, that the people will worship the golden calf. It's already been fated. It's already known. And so Satan is literally going to say to God, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We know, everybody knows up here what these people will do. And yet you're still giving it to them, which of course begs the question that God was also fated to give us the Torah. So everything would have been fated. But the rabbis love this imagination, this story that Satan would not have allowed it to happen, would have somehow stepped up and said, no, you can't do it. So God, knowing that, sends Satan on other stuff to do until Moses leaves with the Torah. So God keeps Satan busy, and then Moses is able to leave with the Torah without Satan causing problems. So it's a wonderful imagination of, how Satan works, how Satan works. But this idea that Satan doesn't lie is one of the points that I talked about before, why I enjoyed the show Lucifer, which is, I guess, going to be wrapped up this year. One of the things that the writer of Lucifer, at least one of the writers of Lucifer, who is Jewish, Neil Gaiman, wrote a story of Lucifer version of Lucifer that he can't lie. He doesn't lie. He never lies. He actually can't lie. And this idea that Satan is just really, really compelled to bring out or to tell God all the bad things we do is actually a kind of a different take on it, and not necessarily that Satan is evil. And as you'll see, probably an earlier version of the myths about Satan. It's just that angel in charge of that. All right, so Satan challenges God. They're going to do it. So it's too late now. It's gone. But here's what God says.
In answer to Satan's question regarding the whereabouts of the Torah, God said, I gave the Torah to earth. To earth, then, Satan betook himself with his query, where is the Torah? Earth said, God knows of its course. He knows its abiding place, for he looks to the ends of the earth and sees under the whole heaven. Satan now passed on to the sea to seek for the Torah, but the sea also said, it is not with me. And the abyss said, it is not in me. Destruction and death said, we have heard the fame thereof with our ears. Satan now returned to God and said, O Lord of the world, everywhere have I sought the Torah, but I found it not. God replied, go seek the son of Amram. Satan now hastened to Moses and asked him, where is the Torah that God has given you? Whereupon Moses answered, who am I that the Holy One, blessed be he, should have given me the Torah? God hereupon spoke to Moses, oh, Moses, you uttered a falsehood. But Moses answered, O Lord of the world, you have in your possession a hidden treasure that daily delights you. Dare I presume it to declare it my possession? Then God said, as a reward for your humility, the Torah shall be named for you, and it shall henceforth be known as the Torah of Moses.
So that's a little Midrash. The point is to tell us, why do we call it the 5 books of Moses? Why do we call it the Torah of Moshe? Why is this the title for it?
Yeah, and was there another Torah that wasn't of Moshe?
Well, no, but it may have just been called the Torah. But Moses gets this appellation added to the Torah because of his humility, and because in this scene, when he's confronted by Satan, he lied. Well, he didn't really lie, kind of lied. Assumedly, this whole scene, by the way, is set up.
Equivocated.
Yes. So this whole scene, by the way, seems to be set up by the fact that God is buying time for Moses to get the Torah to the people so that Satan will not throw a wrench into this whole process. Yeah, I mean, Moses is recognizes, again, all this allows us to recognize that the Torah is not Moses's, right? It's not. It's a treasure for everybody, and it's God's treasure. You know, God gave it to us as a treasure. But Moses is kind of, well, we know it's called the Torah of Moses, and to some extent, the rabbis want to get him off the hook by saying he didn't call it that. He didn't call it. It wasn't his job. It wasn't his. He didn't do that. It wasn't his responsibility. Because God said it's going to be the Torah of Moses. But again, the lines that the different parts of the world say, those are lines that we find in Psalms, which is, you know, again, God knows the course, the abiding place. He looks to the ends of the earth. That's a line from Psalms. Now, what's interesting about it is, again, the rabbis love putting quotes from other parts of the Bible into the Midrash, and having, you know, a place for these beautiful words to take on new meaning. But again, what's really behind this Midrash is that, do human beings really deserve the Torah? That is part of the presupposition today, which is no, we don't deserve the Torah. We have it, and thank God we have it, but we don't always do the right thing, even though we have it. And so we either aren't paying attention to it, we're not cognizant of the rules, or we, again, are just so human and fallible that we just need to constantly turn back to it, because on the face of it, we really screwed up right away. So little Midrash coming up here about the imagination that you may have had imagination on it, the thoughts of what were the Ten Commandments, what did they look like, what did they feel like, what was their composition, what did they actually, how did they feel? So that's what we're going to read now, a little bit about the Ten Commandments.
Moses departed from the heavens with the two tables on which the Ten Commandments were engraved, and just as the words of it are by nature divine, so too are the tables on which they are engraved. These were created by God's own hand in the dusk of the first Shabbat at the close of creation, and were made of a sapphire-like stone. On each of the two tables are the Ten Commandments, 4 times repeated, and in such wise were they engraved that the letters were legible on both sides. For like the tables, the writing and the pencils for inscription too were of heavenly origin. Between the separate commandments were noted down all the precepts of the Torah in all their particulars, although the tables were not more than 6 hands in length and as much in width. It is another of the attributes of the tables that though they are fashioned out of the hardest stone, they can still be rolled up like a scroll. When God handed the tables to Moses, he seized them by the top third, whereas Moses took hold of the bottom third. But 1/3 remained open, and it was in this way that the divine radiance was shed upon Moses's face.
Okay, so this is a Midrash, partly the last part. I'll do the last part first. It's partly an explanation of how Moses's face ended up shining, was because it kind of shone through the Ten Commandments. So there's a few different Midrashim here that have been woven together. They can't all necessarily be true, but they're all pretty amazing in their imagination of what the Ten Commandments actually look like, felt like. So first of all, you have this tradition that they're written on sapphire, which pretty wild. Must have been, like, if you imagine what that's like.
It'd be very difficult to engrave something on sapphire because it's so hard.
Yeah. So this is God, right? And so the only things that can cut sapphire or diamond or these kind of precious stones are something miraculous. So either again, it's heavenly, right? And so this midrash is that this is one of those things that was also done it right before God was stopping to create. So just as again, God is kind of winding down, God makes these miraculous things. And one of the things that's created is the 10 commandments themselves. The actual tablets were created at that moment for this moment. So anytime we have a miraculous supernatural thing that's done, those things are done at that dusk, the first Shabbat. So the rainbow of the flood. I mean, we've read them. You've seen this. Those of you who've been here for months know what we're talking about when we talk about these magical, supernatural things that are created by God. Now, that's one teaching. The other teaching is that they're written like on a cube and they're on every side. That's also an interesting idea because, again, even though you only need to be written once, there is this understanding that in between the writing of the commandments themselves is the whole Torah, which then gets to the fact that they're not just the 10 commandments that Moses is bringing down. It's in fact the whole Torah, which again, we go back, you kind of like hear that and you're like, it says he came down with tablets. Well, he came down with tablets, but in between the writing of the commandments are these other laws that, again, 613 commandments. And I guess you'd say the narrative too, that contains them. That's a lot of writing. Okay. Well, then there's a problem. Well, how do you write that much? And it says the Torah is written on a scroll in other places. So how is this a scroll? It says they're tablets. And so now you have this midrash that, yeah, they're like that, but because they're made by God, even though they're solid, they can be rolled up. So all of these things are kind of based on what we know about the Torah, what we know about the 10 commandments. How can both of these things be true? Also, if God's doing it, it must be a miracle. It must be amazing. It must not just be a normal kind of writing and a normal kind of surface. All of these things they're all at play. What's so strange is that our ancestors imagined this in a way that we don't. I guess, their answer would be anything's possible for God. What's really interesting now is that we've gotten to a point now where we actually can kind of imagine or have even created things like this. And so what's so strange is that this type of possibility is no longer mythological or supernatural or unbelievable, that we actually do have the technology to kind of do this. Not kind of do it, we can. Because first of all, as everybody knows, we can, on a microdot, you can put in a whole lot more than the Torah on a microdot. So we have the capabilities of doing this now without a doubt. As we also said, we can hyperlink information now that at least we can do on a computer. But are we that far away from hyperlinking information on text in front of us that no longer are a computer? Because we essentially do that anyways with our phones and with our tablets. We call them the tablets, right? Our tablets. Those tablets have the ability to do amazing things that when you look at it, if you saw it today, like we take it for granted, but 30, 40 years ago, people would have thought that these things that we walk around with are, from Star Trek. And so what we don't know is in the future, can we do even more amazing stuff with surfaces and with materials that will allow us to do things like essentially have a paper that we can roll up, but that also is, we have them, I should say, people have played around with them, but they have rollable tablets. We have foldable phones now. But I think we know we're going to have even more amazing stuff in the future, probably not too far away in the future. So it's not really that unbelievable, some of these descriptions. But they were that back then, and they were up until a few years ago. Not anymore, though. All of this stuff that Moses was able to carry in his hands would have been impossible, maybe technologically impossible, but not anymore. So all of this is kind of interesting for us to imagine in our day, but for our ancestors, it was mythological. It was supernatural. Interesting how that's happened in our own lifetime for most of us. All right. So that's how Moses winds up on fire, if you will, shining. Now we're going to actually get to the discussions of the golden calf, and one of the lowest points in Jewish history, if not the first super low point as a group. Because again, being enslaved was a low point, but we're not a people yet. In Mount Sinai, we become a people, we get laws, we get a relationship with God as a people. And then literally within 40 days, we are, or 40 days later, we're messed up. As Moses is coming back down, we are engaged in, again, this horrible act of depravity. So let us read the Midrash on the golden calf.
When God revealed himself upon Mount Sinai, all Israel sang a song of jubilation to the Lord, for their faith in God was on this occasion without bounds and unexampled, except possibly at the time of Mashiach, when they will likewise cherish this firm faith. The angels too rejoiced with Israel. Only God was downcast on this day and sent his voice out of thickest darkness in token of his sorrow. The angels hereupon said to God, "Is not the joy that you have created yours?" But God replied, "You do not know what the future will bring." He knew that 40 days later, Israel would give the lie to the words of God, "You shall have no other gods before me," and would adore the golden calf. And truly, God had sufficient cause to grow sad at this thought, for the worship of the golden calf had more disastrous consequences for Israel than any other of their sins. God had resolved to give life everlasting to the nation that would accept the Torah. Hence, Israel, upon accepting the Torah, gained supremacy over the angel of death. But they lost this power when they worshiped the golden calf. As a punishment for this, their sin, they were doomed to study the Torah in suffering and bondage, in exile and unrest, amid cares of life and burdens, until in the Messianic time and in the future world, God will compensate them for all their sufferings. But until that time, there is no sorrow that falls to Israel's lot that is not in part a punishment for their worship of the golden calf.
Wow. So there you have it, folks. When you talk about how bad the golden calf incident was, it's bad enough that it puts all of Jewish history into a very dark plan. And again, when the rabbis actually get into this right now, they're telling us that we were going to live forever. It is only because of the golden calf that we wind up losing this power. So what happens is that not only do we lose our ability to live forever, but we have a punishment which again will only end during the time of the Messiah, when we do live forever and when we get compensated for all the punishment that we've had in the time before that. So pretty wild, folks. It
So
is
the
an
Holocaust
explanation for
part of that
everything.
punishment?
What?
Would the Holocaust be part of that punishment?
Yep, Joyce. Everybody who dies is part of that punishment. No, there is no sorrow that falls to Israel that is not in part, is not part of that punishment. So this is
So
something,
even the rockets falling on Gaza today
yeah,
are part of that.
everything that we do,
Well,
everything
even
that
if
we
you just die normally, it's part of the
part of it.
punishment.
Yeah, exactly. So everything that happens to us bad is because of the golden calf. Now, again, you could say, well, that's like the original sin.
Yeah.
And to some extent, it is, because this is the original sin that we committed as a people. Now, again, you could say, well, it does seem out of proportion, but the reality is the rabbis recognize that the juxtaposition of the golden calf to happening at Mount Sinai means that the trajectory is completely off right away. I mean, to use rockets, I mean, this is the Chinese rocket. I mean, this is going off right away. And so we never achieve what we're supposed to achieve because of the golden calf. And we've talked about the golden calf before in some of our other classes, and in Wednesday night, we talked about it recently. There's a very high probability that the golden calf incident is actually a political statement more than anything else. And it's hard to swallow that when we know that the rabbis felt, and where it's placed in the Torah, it's so bad. Look, it's very possible that there was an incident of the Israelites rejecting God and worshiping idols right away. But the fact that it's an idol that's the golden calf in particular that does this doesn't seem to be a coincidence, because the language that's written in the Torah is almost verbatim to the language that's used to describe the creation of the golden calves that King Jeroboam established during the time of his rebellion against the north. And so when Jeroboam became king, he put a golden calf in Dan and he put one in Bethel. And he basically said, these are the idols that kind of recognize, not that they're idols that we worship, but that God rests over our kingdom, that the calves are the transportation devices for God, or again, the thrones or chariots for God. The idols themselves were not God, but they were representations of God, much as, interestingly, as we read in the book of Exodus, the Kruvim, the cherubim that are on top of the ark, are very similar to those calves, in the sense that that's where God is, above this thing.
So why were the cherubim okay, but not the calves?
This is the question, Rosemary, and it seems to be, again, that one person's golden statue is an idol and the other person's that it's completely acceptable. That's why it seems to be more of a political statement, that the golden calf was Jeroboam's statement, and
sectarian then.
and this is totally unacceptable for a person to have done this. And so we have a story, that's what the Israelites worship. Now, that being said, I do believe that the story of the Israelites worshiping an idol at Mount Sinai is probably, again, a very important and old narrative that was passed down, that people really did believe that it happened. And in fact, maybe it in fact did happen. I don't have proof of it. We don't have proof, but there seems to be a kernel of this that's actually more substantiated by the politicization of it. The fact that it already existed, the story was well known that the Israelites worshiped something, and maybe even a calf there. The embellishment and the way the story is told is so clearly written by the same author that there's not even a question in my mind. And it's my mind, doesn't have to be your mind, but the language that's used to describe the golden calves in both scenes is so obvious that it has to be. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a calf that was built or something else. As I said, I'd actually almost guarantee that there was some other statue that was made. The point is that by the time of the rabbis, it doesn't matter, and they didn't care whether this was a political statement about Jeroboam. The fact is that the Israelites messed up immediately, like immediately at the same place that they get the Torah, they break the Torah. And this is the fact. I mean, this is the reality that, again, sets into motion Jewish suffering for the rest of our lives. This is why, again, this day is considered to be the dark day of Jewish history. Again, according to some of the rabbis, that it actually happens on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because if we get the 10 Commandments on Shavuot this weekend coming up, the anniversary of the hearing of the 10 Commandments in chapter 20, then about 40 days later, we come to this dark day on the Jewish calendar when the temples were destroyed, when Jews were literally expelled during the Inquisition. People say the Inquisition started. No, the Inquisition started before that. The expulsion of Jews from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula was 1492 on Tisha B'Av. And this is the tradition of this day essentially being put into motion in the Bible by the golden calf situation. So the temples are destroyed. The first and second temples are destroyed at this time of year. And it's the golden calf anniversary. So this is a horrible, I mean, for the rabbis, there's nothing worse than this moment. And so they took it very seriously, and there will be a redemption. So the good news is that when the Messiah comes, we'll get to live forever, and all this suffering that we've been dealing with for the last 3,000 years will be compensated for it. But we went off the rails. So how could we go off the rails? How could we be so stupid and so messed up? Well, now we get some midrashim about how we messed up.
Strange as it may seem that Israel should set out to worship this idol at the very time when God was busied with the preparation of the 2 tablets of the law, still the following circumstances are to be considered. When Moses departed from the people to hasten to God to receive the Torah, he said to them, 40 days from today, I will bring you the Torah. But at noon on the 40th day, Satan came and with a wizard's trick conjured up for the people a vision of Moses lying stretched out dead on a bier that floated midway between earth and heaven. Pointing to it with their fingers, they cried, "This is the man Moses that brought us up out of the land of Egypt." Under the leadership of the magicians, Jannes and Jambres, they...
Sorry, that just...
Sorry.
Somebody just sent that to me.
That's
Thank
those
you.
magicians.
Yeah.
They appeared before Aaron, saying, the Egyptians were wont to carry their gods about with them, to dance and play before them, that each might be able to behold his gods. And now we desire that you should make us a god, such as the Egyptians had. When Hur, the son of Miriam, whom Moses during his absence had appointed joint leader of the people with Aaron, owing to his birth, which placed him among the notables of highest rank, beheld this, he said to them, "Oh, you frivolous ones, you are no longer mindful of the many miracles God wrought for you." In their wrath, the people slew this pious and noble man. And pointing out his dead body to Aaron, they said to him threateningly, "If you will make us a god, it is well. If not, we will dispose of you as of him."
So
Aaron had no...
let's pause right there just before we get too far into this story, because again, we just studied it on Wednesday night, month and a half ago, 2 months ago. Ki Tisa, we read this, and again, for people who haven't read the story in the Torah in a while, what's interesting about this story is that Aaron is placed into the role of making the golden calf. So the rabbis have a real problem with this because Aaron is a good person. He's the first priest. He's, not as great as Moses, but pretty darn close. How could he have done this? So it had to have been really, really bad. And so we have lots of midrashim that appeared over the years, which kind of explain how things got so bad. So the first is that Moses is up there for 40 days. Now, he said he'd be up there for 40 days, but he comes back late on that 40th day. And so now they don't believe that maybe he's even alive. And so Satan actually is able to, in this story, Satan 100% does deception and lies. So again, we're talking about a time when Satan employs deception. There is magic. All of these kinds of things are part of it. And in this case, he shows the people that Moses is dead. Now, again, because Satan is an angel, he could have shown the people what happens to Moses down the road, which is that, God buries him and it's kind of a miraculous burial, and that he floats between heaven and earth, and like all of that makes sense, but he's not dead yet. And so Satan shows it to him, and they make the assumption that he's already dead. So the rabbis are a little careful to say that Satan doesn't really lie. He just shows it in the wrong order. And he shows them Moses' death, and that's enough to do it. They go bonkers. So there's this other midrash about Jannes and Jambres. This is a different midrash. And in this midrash, in this story, and it's been woven together, but it's a separate story. In this story, again, Jannes and Jambres, according to the extra biblical sources, and I'm talking about like old sources in the pseudepigrapha, Jannes and Jambres are magicians. They are Pharaoh's magicians, and they're also the sons, according to tradition, of Balaam. We've already read about them before. They do magic. They're not good people. They're wizards, and they are powerful, and they're always up to no good. And in this case, somehow they're with us. They're traveling with us. And they go to Aaron and say, hey, the Egyptians are always, they knew how to party, and they know what to do with God. Maybe we're supposed to kind of do what they do. Now, of course, that's what you'd expect those guys to say. And literally one of the most important leaders of the time was this guy Hur, who is, according to tradition, Midrash, though it doesn't say it in the Torah, is actually Miriam's son. We know that Hur is one of the leaders because it says earlier in Exodus chapter 17 that he's one of the guys who helps Moses while they're fighting the Amalekites. And so he's there as one of the leaders. He's part of the family, part of the inner circle. Now, Hur steps up and says, no, that's not what we do. We don't do that. And Hur is killed. They kill him. They literally kill Hur. Aaron at this point is threatened by saying, if you don't want to wind up like Hur, you better get to building us an idol. Now, this explains why Aaron actually does it. The Torah doesn't tell us that Hur is killed or that anybody is killed. But there is definitely, when Aaron recounts to Moses what happened, he says these people are out of control. And that he essentially, again, is in a situation where he feared for his life. But not that somebody actually got killed, that they actually killed somebody. That's the imagination of the rabbis, that Aaron must have had a really, really, really big reason to do what he did, which is, we killed him, we're going to kill you too. So that's why Aaron has no choice. All right, so let's continue. That's how we got to this point of Aaron really not knowing what to do and following the people.
Aaron had no fear for his life, but he thought, if Israel were to commit so terrible a sin as to slay their priest and prophet, God would never forgive them. He was willing rather to take a sin upon himself than to cast a burden of so wicked a deed upon the people. He therefore granted them their wish to make them a god, but he did it in such a way that he still cherished the hope that this thing might not come to pass. Hence he demanded from them not their own ornaments for the fashioning of the idol, but the ornaments of their wives, their sons, and their daughters, thinking, if I were to tell them to bring me gold and silver, they would immediately do so. Hence, I will demand the earrings of their wives, their sons, and their daughters, that through their refusal to give up their ornaments, the matter might come to naught. But Aaron's assumption was only in part true. The women did indeed firmly refuse to give up their jewels for the making of a monster that is of no assistance to his worshippers. As a reward for this, God gave the new moons as holidays to women, and in the future world too, they will be rewarded for their firm faith in God, in that, like the new moons, they too may monthly be rejuvenated.
Okay, so let's pause right there. Because,
like Venus.
because we just are celebrating the Rosh Chodesh, and what a perfect time to reflect on the fact that women get rejuvenated every month in the future. My guess is that's probably a weird take on the fact that women have to go through monthly menstruation now, but maybe in the future it won't be the same, I guess. That actually they'll go through a cycle. Something that happens with the moon allows it to never get old and never lose its life force, if you will. So I think they recognize in a weird way, I mean, it's a weird way that's part of the monthly cycle, but that's not the point anyways. The main point is the women did the right thing. The men, we'll just say, as we know, don't. But Aaron does tell the people, bring me the jewels, the treasures of your family, right? Of your wives, your sons and daughters. So the rabbis infer from this that he's making it harder for them to do it by telling them that, because if he said just bring me your stuff, they would have brought the stuff. But by bringing the stuff that your kids, your wives, your wife, they're not going to part with it. And he was right, except again, the men were so bent on doing it that they did it anyways. But again, this is one of the special midrashim we have, I guess you could say, that reminds us that women are holier than men and will not give in to their stupidity as quickly as men do. So there's obviously some that are not as.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi? They're always talking about the men in the future world studying Torah. What do the women do in the future world? Is there any midrash on that?
They're rejuvenated. It must be a spa.
I like that.
No, there are some midrashim. Thinking about, we've read some stuff about what women do in heaven, but it seems as though they are kind of basking in divine light. Yeah, the weird thing about the midrashim about
the guys have to work and women don't have to work at all.
Well, the interesting thing about it is, well, it's not work because they want to. So there's this assumption that we must want to always study Torah, so we'll even do it in heaven. But there is this kind of idea that, do we really need to do it in heaven? No, but we want to, because we always want to. We'll always want to. So what would heaven be? Doing what we're doing right now, which is studying. So this is the this is part of the assumption there. And yes, we like the idea of a spa day. I like the idea of a spa day. That's what I want to do and have. That's what I want to do in the world to come. I want to be in a spa. But but what's so wonderful about this midrash that everybody remembers is that their wives did not do the wrong thing. So it's a
But we have to die anyway. That's not fair.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So everybody's gonna die.
Doesn't that have to do with our snake issues also?
Why?
From Garden of Eden, why we die?
Oh yeah. But here's the interesting thing. If we hadn't eaten of the fruit, everyone would have lived forever, every human. At Mount Sinai, we got a second chance. Humanity, according to the Torah, to the rabbis, all humanity screwed up at Garden of Eden. But here humans have a chance to fix it, or Jews have a chance to fix that, and they blew it again. So yeah, this is very much the original sin, or as a people, as the Jewish people. This is where everything goes off the rails for us. And this is, again, the worst thing possible. So again, the Torah says, bring the gold of your wife, and so this is Midrash essentially plays off of that. But of course, as we know, they're going to get anyways.
But when the men saw that no gold or silver for the idol was forthcoming from the women, they drew off their own earrings that they wore in Arab fashion and brought these to Aaron. No living calf would have shaped itself out of the gold of these earrings if a disaster had not occurred through an oversight of Aaron. For when Moses, at the exodus of Israel from Egypt, set himself to lifting the coffin of Joseph out of the depths of the Nile, he employed the following means. He took 4 leaves of silver and engraved on each the image of one of the beings represented at the celestial throne, the lion, the man, the eagle, and the bull. He then cast on the river the leaf with the image of the lion, and the waters of the river became tumultuous and roared like a lion. He then threw down the leaf with the image of man, and the scattered bones of Joseph united themselves into an entire body. And when he cast in the 3rd leaf with the image of the eagle, the coffin floated up to the top. As he had no use for the 4th leaf of silver with the image of the bull, he asked a woman to store it away for him while he was occupied with the transportation of the coffin, and later forgot to reclaim the leaf of silver. This was now among the ornaments that the people brought to Aaron, and it was exclusively owing to this bull's image of magical virtues that a golden bull arose out of the fire into which Aaron put the gold and silver.
So this is this weird.
So they're trying to make Aaron look honest when he says, oh, I just put the gold in there and this calf came out.
That is correct, Rosemary.
Which I always loved.
Rosemary reminds us again of that. Said it perfectly. I was going to put it up on the screen, but you already said it. Yeah, Aaron's comment when Moses confronts him about what happens is a little different. When I will show you, because the Torah itself doesn't give us this. It gives us this. Aaron said, take off your, let's just look at this quickly. Excuse me, it's in the Torah. Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring them to me. And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. So the Torah actually does say, he told them to do that and they didn't get it. Or at least it doesn't say it. It says in their ears. Mm-hmm. The rabbis assume that their ears were their ears, that they had them. Which, by the way, the rabbis pointed out, if you caught it, that's what Arabs do. They put, the men wear gold in their ears. It's an Arab style. So the Jews at the time, the Israelites at the time, were doing Arab style stuff, which is wearing gold in their ears. So that is there. Now, what it says originally in 32:4 is that he took from them and cast them in a mold and made it into a golden calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Aaron saw this and built an altar before it. So the story initially is pretty much, hey, Aaron does this pretty clearly. And so
He's obviously complicit in that Roshan.
yep. And so here is what happens when Moses says, when Moses confronts him. Wait, hold a second.
Past it.
Yeah. So yes.
Yeah, they gave it to me and I held it
24.
into the fire.
So make us a God to lead us. For that man Moses, we do not know what has happened to him, which again is presupposes that they think he's dead. And he says, so I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off, which is not what he said.
Mhm.
Didn't say that. They gave it to me and I hurled it into the fire and out came this calf. So the Midrash is going to play off of this very odd phrase in there, which is, it just came out, it popped out. I didn't do anything. It just was there, which is again, absolving Aaron of what it seems to be is his direct creation of this thing. Okay, well, what happened? This is one of these crazy things that was part of a magical thing that was connected to Joseph's coffin. And again, according to the Ezekiel vision, that the throne, the divine throne, has a lion, a man, an eagle, and a bull. This composite angelic thing, which is this what the Kruvim look like? Is this what some of the angels look like? Is this what the angels of the Merkavah, the chariot, look like? Look, it's problematic. And the rabbis know it's problematic, which is why they even have this Midrash invoke these things, because they're saying, look, you know, when you're going down that road, as Rosemary said, what's the difference between the Kruvim and the golden calf? It's problematic. And so they say, look, yeah, if you take one piece of it, you're going to get a golden calf. And so they recognize that there's a problem with these kinds of angelic depictions. And sure enough, one of them led unintentionally to this creation of a golden calf. So it's the connection between the calf, the bull, and the Merkavah, of the chariot, with the golden calf. And again, when you're playing with fire, or when you're playing with magic, when you're playing with these kinds of things, it can be a problem. And so this is actually like a recognition that this is a problem. So again, it absolves Aaron of some of this by saying, yeah, he didn't form it. It just came out that way. Not exactly the way the Torah kind of depicts it, at least the first time. Now, so Giannis and Yambres blamed the weird magical calf creator thing, mold, if you will, whatever it becomes, the thing, that's partly to blame. The people obviously are to blame. But now we have a Midrash that it's even drilled down even further. Didn't print. Wrong paper. There was no paper. So now this is who's really responsible.
When the mixed multitude that had joined Israel in their exodus from Egypt saw this idol conducting itself like a living being, they said to Israel, "This is your God, O Israel." The people then betook themselves to the 70 members of the Sanhedrin and demanded that they worship the bull that had led Israel out of Egypt. God, said they, had not delivered us out of Egypt, but only himself, who had in Egypt been in captivity. The members of the Sanhedrin remained loyal to their God and were hence cut down by the rabble. The 12 heads of the tribes did not answer the summons of the people any more than the members of the Sanhedrin, and were therefore rewarded by being found worthy of beholding the divine vision.
All right. So who's really responsible for this? The mixed multitude. The people who maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place. The average Israelite didn't have a problem. It was those people that shouldn't have been part of the Exodus in the first place. They're the ones who are the real problem. A little bit of a religious or ethnic slur, if you will. But they were really bad in the sense that they're actually murdering people. They killed the Sanhedrin. They killed the leaders, and this was the choice between worshiping the golden calf and not worshiping the golden calf was also maybe life or death in the minds of the rabbis. So that is a pretty serious deal. But as you notice, the golden calf actually wasn't just a statue. It was magic. And so the people were pretty taken by the calf itself. All right, I'll keep going.
But the people worshiped not only the golden calf, they made 13 such idols, one for each of the 12 tribes, and one for all Israel. More than this, they employed manna, which God in his kindness did not deny them even on this day, as an offering to their idols. The devotion of Israel to this worship of the bull is in part explained by the circumstance that while passing through the Red Sea, they beheld the celestial throne, and most distinctly of the 4 creatures about the throne, they saw the ox. It was for this reason that they hit upon the notion that the ox had helped God in the Exodus from Egypt. And for this reason did they wish to worship the ox beside God.
Yeah, so this again gets back to this Merkavah, this divine throne, which they saw when they were crossing the Red Sea. So as they're crossing the Red Sea, they look up to God. They can't see God, but they can see the ox. Now, again, you could say that they would see the other things too, the eagle, the human-looking thing, the lion, but it was the ox that stood out. Again, I don't know, of those 3, I don't know that I'd pay most attention to the ox, but they did. But again, it's an explanation for how they got on this idea. How did they come up with a cow? Well, it's because it's part of the divine throne. So it is kind of the problematic nature of how human beings see things. And when they see one aspect of something, they focus on that, and then they wind up worshiping that. So the question is, what did they offer to this idol? They made offerings. Well, what did they offer? They offered manna, because that's what they ate. You know, we sit there going, well, they must have just offered up animals, but they didn't really have animals to offer up. They had manna. And so they offered that, which of course is horrific because they're taking God's own daily food gift to them and using it to offer up to an idol. So it's literally slapping God in the face.
Well, the bull's the only of the 4 creatures. The bull is the only one that would be edible. Maybe they were hungry. In fact, we know they were hungry.
They were hungry for a hamburger.
They wanted a hamburger.
They saw that and they said, we must have that.
Yeah.
Well, these people obviously have lots of reasons to mess up. Partly it's what they see, and it's their eyes, and they see the bull itself doing weird stuff. It's not just a statue, it's actually moving. So, oh my gosh, this really is an idol. This is a living thing. I mean, it's a miracle. So it's, I mean, the Midrash builds on the fact that this is, if Aaron's making it, and if the people are making it, and if they're offering manna, and all this magic is going on, this supernatural stuff, it's got power. And that this is dangerous. So here's what happens.
The people then wanted to erect an altar for their idol, but Aaron tried to prevent this by saying to the people, "It will be more reverential to your God if I build the altar in person," for he hoped that Moses might appear in the meantime. His expectation, however, was disappointed, for on the morning of the following day, when Aaron had at length completed the altar, Moses was not yet at hand, and the people began to offer sacrifices to their idol and to indulge in lewdness.
Yeah. So this gets to the other issue, which it says that Aaron built an idol. I showed you in chapter 32, it says Aaron built the altar, which, wow. I mean, it's one thing that he built. It's one thing that he built the idol, but then it says he built an altar. It doesn't say he has to build the altar. I mean, that's like adding insult to injury. So the rabbis give an explanation, which is that he's buying time. He's trying to get Moses, he's trying to get them to not do anything, at least offer anything on it. It's bad enough they built it. Now they're going to do offerings and go crazy and do their orgy in front of the in front of this idol. It's going to be even worse. Let me buy some time. I'll make the altar. So again, this allows Aaron to get off the hook in a really positive way too, which again, the Midrash, if you caught it, says that Aaron wants to do this to keep the people from messing up. That's part of what he does that's so powerful, is that he doesn't want the people to be responsible. He'll take on the sin rather than they'll take on the sin. And so Aaron is being a true leader in the sense of trying to be responsible for everybody else, even if that means being punished. You can make the argument that God knows that, it kind of gets to the question, I'm jumping the gun, but all of this jumps the question to, why does Aaron never get punished for what he does here? Now, again, we have the Midrash, we talked about it, that he does get punished by his sons Nadav and Avihu being killed for offering up strange offerings, which is connected to offerings in Leviticus. And one of the only stories in Leviticus is the death of Nadav and Avihu. But let's say that's not the punishment for Aaron. If Aaron gets away without ever being punished, then the rabbis are kind of in a quandary, and they have to have an explanation for why does Aaron never get punished. And the reason that Aaron, in their minds, never gets punished is that he's doing this all because he has no choice and because he'd rather be punished than them. And that's really God knowing that. How can he punish Aaron for trying to keep the people away from sin? We're going to read a little bit more because it's all so good, all of this, because it explains not just the golden calf, of course, but it explains human nature and human predilection for doing the wrong thing, and what we can learn from it. So there's a lot we can learn from it. So let's read a little bit more.
When the people turned from their God, he said to Moses, who was still in heaven, "Go get you down, for your people, which you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Moses, who until then had been superior to the angels, now, owing to the sins of Israel, feared them greatly. The angels, hearing that God meant to send him from his presence, wanted to kill him. And only by clinging to the throne of God, who covered him with his mantle, did he escape from the hands of the angels, that they might do him no harm. He had particularly hard struggle with the 5 angels of destruction, Kezeph, Ah, Hema, Mashit, and Haron, whom God had sent to annihilate Israel. Moses then hastened to the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and said to them, if you are men who are participators in the future life, stand by me in this hour, for your children are as a sheep that is led to the slaughter. The three patriarchs united their prayers with those of Moses, who said to God, have you not made a vow to these three to multiply their seed as the stars? And are they now to be destroyed? In recognition of the merits of these three pious men, where are we? Sorry. God called away three of the angels of destruction, leaving only two, whereupon Moses further importuned God, for the vow you have made to Israel, take from them the angel Mashit. And God granted his prayer. Moses continued, for the vow you have made me, take from them also the angel Haron. God now stood by Moses so that he was able to conquer this angel, and he thrust him down deep into the earth in a spot that is a possession of the tribe of Gad, and there held him captive.
Yeah, so these angels, once they're turned loose, they're going to destroy. That's their job. They're angels of destruction. So originally there were supposed to be 5 angels of destruction. They're able to knock down 3 of them right away. Then they're able to knock down another one, Moses. And then finally, they're able to knock down the last one. These angels, again, they're punishing angels. They're God's angels, but they're angels of destruction. Just like there was an angel of destruction that visited the Egyptians the night that they were punished, these angels are called on, can be called on to destroy even us, even Israel. So Moses does what he can, but of course he doesn't do it by himself. He has Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that are there. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he says to them, look, God made you a promise that your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sand, right? You got to do something. They're about to be destroyed. So he gets them to advocate for them. Again, one of these angels doesn't get destroyed, but is cast onto the earth, which is very similar to some of the Greek myths about titans and forces that were kept in check, if you will, destructive forces, volcanoes, cyclones, those kinds of things. They are being held back from destruction. So here's one of them.
So long as Moses lived, this angel was held in check by him. And if he tried, even when Israel sinned, to rise out of the depths, open wide his mouth, and destroy Israel with his panting, all Moses had to do was utter the name of God, and Haron, or as he is sometimes called, Peor, was drawn once more into the depths of the earth. At Moses' death, God buried him opposite the spot where Peor is found. For should Peor, if Israel sinned, reach the upper world and open his mouth to destroy Israel with his panting, he would, upon seeing Moses' grave, be so terror-stricken that he would fall back into the depths once more.
So why is Moses buried where he's buried? Because he's buried in that place on the other side of the Jordan River to keep Peor, to keep this angel of destruction, Haron or Peor, to keep him in check. Because just his grave being there keeps this angel of destruction from getting out. So this is this idea that there are forces that can be unleashed that will be destructive. And again, they have a mission to do. And until they do their mission, they're dangerous. And so they're sent by God. So in a sense, they're holy. We don't like them. They're not good. They're really, really scary. But yet they are created by God. And what gives them power, what animates them, is us sinning. It's us doing wrong. So again, we are to blame when we have misfortune or destruction comes upon us. It's our fault. This is a very common thread that we have in Jewish theology, which is that everything is a punishment. Everything bad that happens is a punishment. Everything. So let's read this last part of the Midrash today about these angels of destruction.
Moses did indeed manage the angels of destruction, but it was a more difficult matter to appease God in his wrath. He addressed Moses harshly, crying, "The grievous sins of men had once caused me to go down from heaven to see their doings. Do you likewise go down from heaven now? It is fitting that the servant be treated as his master. Do you now go down? Only for Israel's sake have I caused this honor to fall to your lot. But now that Israel has become disloyal to me, I have no further reason thus to distinguish you." Moses hereupon answered, "O Lord of the world, not long since you did say to me, 'Come now herefore, and I will send you that thou may bring forth my people out of Egypt.' And now you call them my people. Nay, whether pious or sinful, they are your people still." Moses continued, "What will you now do with them?" God answered, "I will consume them, and I will make of you a great nation." "O Lord of the world," replied Moses, "if the three-legged bench has no stability, how then shall the one-legged stand? Fulfill not, I implore you, the prophecies of the Egyptian magicians who predicted to their king that the star Ra'ah would move as a harbinger of blood and death before the Israelites." Then he began to implore mercy for Israel. "Consider their readiness to accept the Torah, whereas the sons of Esau rejected it." God, "But they transgressed the precepts of the Torah. One day were they loyal to me, then instantly set to work to make themselves the golden calf." Moses, "Consider that when in your name I came to Egypt and announced to them your name, they at once believed in me and bowed down their heads and worshiped you." God, "But now they bow down their heads before their idol." Moses, "Consider that they sent you their young men to offer you burnt offerings." God, "They now offered sacrifices to the golden calf." Moses, "Consider that on Sinai they acknowledged that you are their God." God, "They now acknowledge that the idol is their God."
So this conversation is it's reflective of this idea that God is kind of in a tough spot, and it is Moses's job to effectively argue on their behalf. God says to Moses, "These are your people." And Moses shoots back, "They're not my people, they're your people." And Moses turns, by the way, to Aaron and says, what did this people do? So the people are kind of like the child who the parents come home and go, "Your son, you should see what your son did." So Moses is Moses uses, I'm just going to show you, Moses has the when he's arguing on behalf of the people, when God first says to Moses, "Your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt," God says, "I'm going to destroy them." And Moses says, "Let not your anger blaze forth against your people whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with your great power and mighty hand." So notice that Moses won't have any of it. And then Moses catches him again by saying, "Don't let the Egyptians say that you took them out just to annihilate them," which, he's already said to God, you can't, it'll make you look bad. And then he says, remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He promised them. So that's where we get that midrash that he goes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in heaven and says, guys, do something. Guys, do something, because he's going to destroy us in all of our all your descendants. You better get on that. And so all of those arguments, making us look bad, making you look bad for the Egyptians, making Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, that promise not come forth, that in effect, these are your people. From the very beginning, all these arguments finally do sway God. That's what it says. He renounced the punishment. And again, it's the punishment is these angels of destruction. Now, what's interesting about it is the way that Moses just said it in this midrash is really powerful. He says to God, and this is like the embellishment of the midrash, why it's so powerful. He says to God, it's this line right here. If a three-legged bench has no stability, how can a one-legged one stand? And that's his answer to God. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're the legs on which this bench is standing. If that can't work, how are you going to put it all on me? If all of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's descendants, and they're all resting on those three guys, you're going to put it all on one guy? The three great people there couldn't fix it. How can one person fix it? So it's Moses actually saying, don't start over with me. I'm not as good as them. And there were three of them. Even if I'm as good as one of them, there's three of them. So he says, really, God, can you really think that all my descendants are going to be better than all of their descendants? So it is kind of a recognition of that's what the three-legged bench was Abraham, Isaac. I mean, those three patriarchs. And again, the Midrash embellishes all of it, including this idea that the Egyptians did know that there was going to be death and talked about it and literally interpreted it that they interpreted the death was going to come to the Israelites, whereas, of course, the death was supposed to come to the Egyptians. Well, if you kill them all, then they were right. They were right in the first place by saying that the death was the Israelites. So all of the Midrash turns all of this into fodder for explanations for why what Moses is really saying is, there's no way you can start over with me. Can't. And so they embellish that and give us even more meat to go on for that. So next week we are going to finish up with that and actually get into kind of still at the golden calf incident. And as you can see, the punishment of the sinners and how that punishment is stopped is what we're going to be reading about after that. So a lot of interesting stuff, which again, of course, gets to who we are today, which is still people who are trying to deal with punishment and suffering and figuring out where we play into that and where God plays into that, which is the inscrutable ways of the Lord. So this is definitely the theme and something in our minds when we read about the golden calf incident, which for the rabbis is often referred to, and just to say golden calf, everybody knows what it is. I mean, it becomes synonymous with our failures, with our fall, with our original sin as a people. Everything goes back to the golden calf, and it's referred to all the time. And again, an explanation for essentially Jewish suffering for the next 3,000 years, 3,200 years of suffering emanates from this incident. So very sad. Anyways, everybody, on a happier note, the good news is that God does have mercy on the people, of course, which is why we're still here. And again, for the women who didn't give up their jewelry and who get connected to the Rosh Chodesh, we wish everybody a Chodesh Tov, a good month.
Oh, also, Rabbi, Pinion Point is part of the Hyatt.
Yes, Yes, thank you. That's the
Really nice area.
Is it?
Really nice area.
all right. We were talking about at the beginning. I got an offer for a getaway to Arizona. So
And then, of course, you'll have to look up Rabbi Magal.
yes, if I go to Sedona, I'll ask you for a few different things there. But folks, man, you really got to get up after reading the Golden Calf, because it, of course, for those of us who read this a couple weeks ago, oh man, we really did screw up, and we screwed up right away.
We were there.
We were there. All of us were there. All right, folks, stay healthy and stay positive and good, and
See you tomorrow night.
hopefully see good
Bye.
stuff. We'll see you tomorrow night, and join us Sunday to celebrate Shavuot if you want to tomorrow night. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.